Hello and welcome to my celebration of Stephanie Brown's 31st anniversary. I actually have two things planned for this video, and the first one is a look at trade dress as it's changed since the New 52 in 2011. So I have a quick stack of comics to go through just to show you some of the cool things, that very nerdy things, to keep with this celebration of Stephanie Brown theme. I started with Batman Eternal. This is the first issue that Stephanie Brown appeared in Batman Eternal. Now, technically, Stephanie appeared in Batman number 28 first in the New 52 continuity, um, but that was a flash forward, and she only appears on the last page of that. This one, she appears in like a good 10 pages, so like half the comic. But what I'm really focusing on here, we'll get back to this comic later, is this is the New 52 trade dress. So right here you see the New 52 with exclamation point. This branding started on every comic that was part of the main continuity um, since September 2011. And that was a huge deal because before that they just had, their DC trade dress. So this New 52 was a big part. And I'll show you a couple of different ways they put it on. Um, so when they put the title sideways, they would sometimes put it here, or sometimes they would put it. So this title is all deconstructed all over the title. So they put it up here. They also put it on the side here, right here, underneath the number and price. So they put, this was kind of an easy trade dress for them to play with because it was just those three text blocks, the New 52 exclamation point. But it was a nice little thing. Definitely gave it a sense of brand unity. They did change their logo between the beginning of the New 52 and when they stopped. And here you can see, here's Catwoman. There is no New 52. And of course, I did pick the one with Stephanie Brown on it because this is a 31st anniversary celebration of Stephanie Brown video. But there is no New 52 on this because this is 2015. And by this point, there is no more New 52. It's all just DC, even though the New 52 continuity was still going on. Then the next year in 2016, in May, we had the start of Rebirth. So Rebirth, this is Detective Comics. Of course, you can see we have Stephanie Brown just hanging out on the top here, right here, Stephanie Brown. She's part of the team of the Gotham Knights in Detective Comics, and every book of DC for a good, I want to say it was like 2 years. No, it wasn't 2 years. It was about a year and a half, I think, maybe just a year. But everyone had this Rebirth banner on the top, and sometimes they even started doing these cool, like the title of the arc at the top. That was helpful to organize things. They also did a bunch of these these Rebirth specials. So they would do Rebirth, and they would do issue 1, which was DC Rebirth Wonder Woman. So it'd be Wonder Woman Rebirth, and then Wonder Woman DC Rebirth number 1. Two number ones. It apparently paid off for them because they did it a lot. So after about a year and a half, 2 years, they stopped doing the Rebirth. And so here's just the banner, Batman Eternal. And you can see that on the other issue of it. It says Batman Eternal. This is no longer in the Rebirth brand, but it's still the Rebirth continuity. And they changed the dress so it has this universe, sort of tall, skinny text. And they always have like a bat symbol or something to sort of tell what family of books a book is in. This, of course, is one of my favorite issues ever because it has Stephanie Brown discovering that she was both Robin and Batgirl in her past. Technically an alternate continuity, but they kind of massaged it into, oh, it actually was her continuity, so that's all good. So the Rebirth was in 2016. The DC Universe branding was from about 2017, 18-ish. In 2021, they started Infinite Frontier. And you can see here, I actually only have one comic with the Infinite Frontier branding because I got some variant covers from that month, and it was only that month. You can see from the very next month, they've kept the same basic logo, this sort of oval at the top here, but they got rid of the triangle Infinite Frontier with the star, and it's just the logo, number, and icon. And all the titles kind of did that. So Infinite Frontier was an attempt to be a big line-wide relaunch and get everyone on board, but it only lasted about 2 years. And it wasn't actually a different continuity per se from Rebirth, but it was a new initiative. And in this year, 2023, they've started this Dawn of DC thing. So this really reminds me of Rebirth. If you look, we've got the big banner with the DC logo on one side and the number and price on the other side. Here we have the logo with the banner and Dawn of DC, similar to Rebirth, kind of reversed, whereas Rebirth was a curtain sort of hanging at the top. Dawn of DC is an arc, sort of like a rainbow at the top. So it's reverse symbol. This one, of course, is blue, but Rebirth was all blue, except for reprints, which were like red and then orange. So depending on how popular something was, you get multiple oranges. And you can see what the reprint was by the color of the Rebirth banner. But Dawn of DB has the icon instead of the price. They put the price down here. For the variants, they kept the Dawn of DC, but they made it small. So it's, the whole thing of their variants is they want to really highlight the art. So I'm going to pull out all the Dawn of DCs I bought. I bought Green Arrow, and these are just number ones. I haven't actually bought a whole bunch of non-number ones. I just wanted to sort of show that I was there. Kind of a weird thing to do, but I also really like those two comics. This is the only Dawn of DC so far that I know of that has Stephanie in it. It has this wonderful page of the Bat family making pancakes, and there's Steph right there by artist Balin Ortega and colorist Tomu Mori. Does a wonderful job. And then, of course, I've got my Dawn of DC Green Lantern. But yeah, that's all the trade dress. Oh, and of course, Green Lantern, you can see, is green, and Batman is black. So they do change the color of the Dawn of DC logo depending on the book that they're advertising. So I just really like things like trade dress and variants that have a theme or the same artist. That is in itself an incentive to purchase, even aside from the content inside, although I try to have a connection to the content inside as well. So we're going to pivot, as my pastor says, move to the celebration of Stephanie Brown's anniversary. Today is June 23rd, 2023. Stephanie Brown was created, her first issue was published June 23rd, 1992, so 31 years ago. And we don't actually have an in-universe birthday for Stephanie Brown. People used to think, because of bad information on the internet, that Stephanie Brown's first issue was in August, because the cover date of a June issue was often in August. But we now believe that Detective Comics number 647 was published in June of 1992 instead of August. So that's when we celebrate Stephanie Brown Day. I am sure there are going to be some people who still go with the old date of August, and we're going to have Stephanie Brown Day in August. And you know what? Multiple people celebrating in August and June is fine with me. But let me go through what some people call the key issues. Perhaps it's a bit silly, but I do love them. So they are key in my heart. First up, we've got the first 3 issues that Stephanie Brown ever appeared in, Detective Comics number 647, 648, and 649. Also, 650 is a great issue. It came in I got about 7 comics in a row to get these 3 because it was cheaper than trying to buy just the 3 or one at a time. Getting 7, it's only about $3 a pop, which is, they originally $1.25. I don't know inflation, but it's probably comparable to $3, maybe even more expensive. But this is the origin story, and it's a great arc. And in November, we're actually getting the trade called Dark Knight Detective Volume 8. First time these issues will ever have been collected in trade. Fantastic. Everyone should get it. But I have these. I tend to keep them in the bag because I want them to stay safe, but I love these 3 issues. I would take them out of the bag if I ever met Chuck Dixon. Unfortunately, Tom Lyle is deceased, so I would never be able to get his signature on those. But that would be really cool. Next, I have a couple of issues of the Robin title in which Steph. These are actually the second arc that Steph appeared in, 15, and 16. This has some art by a lot of different people. Tom Grummett, who did a ton of work on Robin in the 90s. Also, Phil Jimenez did some of the art for some of these, which is kind of cool. Great artist, very famous. Here is actually a standout issue of Stephanie Brown as one of 3 in an anthology called Showcase 95. There was one every month of Showcase. Here's the one before. No, this is Showcase number 6, so this is actually the one after. Thorne is the title character, but all the stories actually, I think, are about the same length. The spoiler story is actually by a different person than Chuck Dixon. So this is the first time Stephanie Brown was written by someone not Chuck Dixon. This artist, cover artist, was Humberto Ramos. I don't remember the inside, but it was actually Stephanie Brown fighting her gymnastics coach, who was dealing drugs, I believe, and her trusting her mom, which is interesting because Chuck Dixon wrote her mom as a drug addict. So, driven to that by, of course, Cluemaster being evil. I have some more Stephanie, and here's one of their first kisses. They actually kiss really early in the Robin series, even though Tim's dating someone else, because Stephanie doesn't know Tim's real name, so she doesn't know he's dating someone else. They don't start dating until long after this, actually. It's actually during this period. But this is classic. It was during the Final Night event, when Gotham's covered in snow, and this is very important because Stephanie learns not to kill. It's like she follows the no-kill rule after this issue. Even though in Detective Comics they have her break that rule, and have to learn the lesson again. The editorial was always sloppy with Stephanie Brown. Here is Stephanie's Baby is Born. I picked that comic up. I really love the cover. Here's one of my favorite issues that no one's ever seen is the 80-page giant of Robin. Stephanie meets the Black Canary for the first time and Wildcat. She gets some training from Black Canary, and Tim's stepmother gets married. And this is a big fat issue, 80 whole pages, so it's like 4 times as long as a normal comic, by Chuck Dixon and I think Al Barronuevo. No, Diego Barreto. Diego Barreto did the art on this guy. And that's not even available digitally that I'm aware of. Definitely not in DC universe. I'm glad I found it. I found it a couple other times. This is Robin 101. I bought this because it has Stephanie as Robin. Now, this is alternate universe Stephanie, but it is the first time we see sort of that energy. And I know Chuck Dixon actually had been trying for like 2 to 3 years before this comic was released. This is actually the first comic released after Chuck Dixon left DC. And he was quite irritated about it. So then I have a novelty item. This has a Stephanie Brown story in it. Actually, a full-fledged 8-page story where Stephanie fights the Penguin and decides she really wants to have more credibility. And so she draws pictures of herself as Robin, as you can see here, pictures of herself. And Batman sees that. So he knows that she would like to be his number 1 partner. And that, of course, was a lead-in to this fantastic cover by Damian Scott. The previous art in the Wizard magazine was also by Damian Scott. I own the first and second issues of the 3 issues where she's Robin. I refused to buy the 3rd issue. I could have. I bought. It was in the box where I found those 2, and I chose not to get it because I don't want to own the issue where Stephanie gets fired unjustly. I do, however, own a bunch of extra issues of Stephanie as Robin. So these 3 happened at the same time: Batgirl, Detective Comics, and Teen Titans. I also own this wonderful Shawley Fish and Rick Burchett Batman Brave and the Bold cartoon tie-in, where you can see Stephanie is Robin in this time-traveling adventure. And, of course, the Robin 80th special. I have both covers that featured Steph. The big one by Derek Chu, and this one. This is by Yasmin Putri, who is now doing Dark Knights of Steel. I also have the Lee Weeks main cover. I really liked this Robin. So I bought 3 covers, and I really enjoy reading the stories inside. that brings us to her Batgirl run, and I'm just going to show 3 of my favorite issues. I don't have the whole series in singles. I have the trades digitally and both sets of trades, the original 3 trades and then the new 2 trades. So this is issue 4, where Steph, it is a standalone. It's right after Steph gets the approval of Babs. She goes out by herself and has like 4 mini adventures plus an overall adventure. And she meets a little girl named Nell, who tells her to keep up the good work, which is a very emotional moment. Art by Trevor Scott and a little bit by Lee Garbett, but mostly Trevor Scott. And it's really fun. Love that issue. Also, Batgirl meets Supergirl and fights Dracula with a great art germ cover. And then this silent cover issue, number 17, which is Stephanie Brown teams up with Damian Wayne Robin. And this is the issue that made me fall in love with Damian Wayne. So it's very important. Really great issue, illustrated by Perry Perez, who did the most issue. No, I think Lee Garbett did the most, and then Perry Perez did the second most issues, and then Dustin Nguyen, and then Raymond Box. So that brings us. So right after Stephanie was Batgirl, she was erased from history with the New 52, but then she came back in Batman Eternal, as I showed. And that Gail Simone wrote an issue where Stephanie was Batgirl in the future, Future's End, which is 5 years in the future. So we don't actually know when it happens, and it's definitely not going to happen now, but it could be sort of possibly canon. And I did get this signed by Clayman, who's a really nice guy. And then Stephanie, after Batman Eternal, she showed up in Catwoman, which I already showed you, but I have lost it in my stack. And then she showed up in the Batgirl title, and she is right here. She was one of Barbara's mentees, and she went and fought crime in issue 50, which was sort of the celebration of the Burnside run. And then, of course, as I showed you, we had the Rebirth, and Steph was a big part of that Detective Comics run by James Tynion IV, and just a wonderful run. I really recommend this run. Stephanie Brown fans can be a little critical of it, but I personally think it's really worth reading. And then came Infinite Frontier after Rebirth. Steph kind of bounced around. I should have pulled out Young Justice, but those are semi-canon now because the Batgirls kind of mess with the continuity. And then we had this Robin issue with Steph, and this art is actually by Jorge Corona, who did the Batgirls covers and the for several issues. So Steph is one of the Robins who confronts Damian. And then we had the Robins miniseries, which is very controversial and unfortunately, fans were very unkind to Tim Seeley. I really like this series. It's complicated. I did get to talk to Seeley a little bit about it, and here's the Stephanie Brown workout cover, which was by Jen Bartel, and is very nice. Slightly less tongue hanging out than the boys got, but still quite appealing. And then, of course, there's the Batgirl series. So my favorite cover, the Josh Middleton, this great David Marquez cover of Jess, Steph, and then the final cover, the final issue where Steph and Babs and Cass are hanging out on the rooftop. So that is my celebration of Stephanie Brown's 31 years in comics. Now I want to do a little bit of sharing of stuff I've tracked down. These are the letters for Detective Comics number 654, and I also have letters from 655. Unfortunately, I no longer have my full digital archives. It would be really cool if I could find them, because all of the DC universe and like Comixology or Amazon stuff is going to be on the it's going to have stripped all this stuff out. So all these letters are lost unless you happen to have downloaded the full scan. So someone actually took the comic physically and scanned it. But I wanted to read some of the letters. Let's see. So, dear Scott and Demi, Regarding Detective Comics number 647, nice to see Chuck dealing with a few of more underused members of the Rogues Gallery. However, I always thought Cluemaster was just a second-rate Riddler, which Chuck Dixon also thought, as we will see in just a few minutes. Still, the story is fun enough. Um, okay, so that's the first page. Second page of letters. Now, on to the story. I remember reading somewhere that in the near future, Gotham would elect a new mayor. If it turns out this new guy is Armand Kroll, where did that name come from anyway? Gotham and the favorite pair of vigilantes will be in for a whole bunch of new bat problems. I do have one question, however. Just where in the world does that blonde girl get that costume so fast? And Scott Peterson, Chuck Dixon's editor on Detective Comics, wrote, "Costumes are us." Armand's name came out of the frighteningly dark, damp, and just darn dank mind of Chuck. What's the deal with these letters without addresses anyway? And then here's some letters from Detective Comics number 648. Because sometimes they didn't have all the letters. They didn't have letters every week, every month, depending on how the comics were going. Dear Denny, regarding Detective Comics 648, it was great. I love the idea of having Cluemaster's daughter, the Spoiler, team up with Batman and Robin. The last page was perfect. Batman asks her name, she tells him the Spoiler, and it ended with Batman replying, "I like that. Please, please, please have the Spoiler join the Dark Knight and the Bird Boy. Please, wouldn't that be an awesome addition to the Bat family? Look, Batman, Batman, Robin, Harold, Alfred, Ace, and Spoiler. Doesn't it fit beautifully? Move over, Batgirl. The Spoiler has come to town," by John Giarento in New York. And Scott says, actually, she's lived in Gotham all her life because Chuck Dixon and Scott Peterson really thought, and Tom Lyle, the artist, really thought about Steph's backstory, even for just, she was originally a one-shot character. But as you can see, people thought she's got potential. She can be a long-term character. She's not just a single story shot. And then we have, "Dear Scott, why isn't Batman smiling in the last panel of this issue? Surely he must know, as we do, what the Spoiler represents to Tim Drake. The appearance of such a character is long overdue. After all, Tim is supposed to be 15. I think actually Tim was supposed to be 14 at this point, but I could be wrong. And being Robin must certainly do wonders for your physique. Perhaps the Spoiler is a little more symbolic than even you intended." A little, this letter gets a little unseemly. We're going to skip to the end. All right. So those are all the letters concerning Spoiler in Detective Comics number 654. So let's move over to Detective Comics 655. I've collected all of these, by the way, on the Stephanie Brown wiki. So if you go to stephaniebrown.fandom.com, I've put all these here, and there's tons of behind the scenes and interviews as well that you can look through, including the ones I'm reading for this celebration. So, so these are all talking about how much they love Chuck Dixon on Detective Comics. And here we go. Detective Comics number 649. So actually, these last letters are about Detective Comics 648. So 649, "Dear Editor, I just wanted you to know how much I enjoy the hint of romance in the air in Detective Comics 649. You know, boy meets girl, boy tackles girl, girl clobbers boy with a brick. Sometimes the old cliches do work the best, huh? Keep up the wonderful work. Heather Peebles in London, England." So we had a lady reading this Detective Comics in England. Fantastic. Ah, young love in the modern age. Who says romance is dead? And that, of course, is Scott Peterson, the editor. And then we have Mr. Paul Lehman in Nebraska saying the story of Detective Comics 649 was fantastic. This new angle on the Cluemaster was genius. I really like the way the Spoiler was brought into the story as well. It will be curious to see if she ever appears again. Please? In the same light as Anarchy, it is good to see characters that Robin can relate to, at least in terms of age or size. So, another request for more Stephanie Brown. Let's see. scooting along. Aha, here's another one. Another thing I loved about this storyline was the spoiler. I hope she sticks around for a while, at least makes an appearance now and then. Perhaps a relationship between Stephanie and Tim. He sure could use some relaxation as well as someone his own age to talk to. The possibilities are endless. And that's from Dan Al I think he's Alcade in New York. Issue 649 was a great conclusion to the Cluemaster storyline. The spoiler, well, she is a real cool character, and I think she should show up now and then, but not as the spoiler. She should show up as a love interest of Tim's, and that's Johnny DC in Ohio. So that's an interesting one that she did. This reader didn't want Steph to be a costumed hero, but I wanted to be a love interest. And then there's a bunch of stuff about upcoming stuff in Batman and the Robin miniseries. So Robin 3, there were 3 miniseries before Robin became an ongoing title. That was also by Chuck Dixon, and I can't remember who did the illustration. I think it was 3 different illustrators, but I could be wrong there. So those are our letters. As you can see, there were a bunch of people, and of course they got more. These are just the ones they selected, that wanted Stephanie to become a regular character and become a romantic interest. And I think this is actually at the same time that Tim was starting to fall in love with Ariana Jurchenko. I think that's the storyline in Robin 2, and I think that they start dating in issue 3, but I could be wrong. I'd have to reread those. Those are fun little miniseries. And then we have, this is printed in the Robin 80 Years of the Boy Wonder story. And this was actually by Chuck Dixon. And the title of this little essay is Because You Demanded It. And I listen to a bunch of Chuck Dixon's YouTube channels, and I can just hear him saying this. So, Because You Demanded It used to be a frequent slug line on comic book covers and in advertisements for upcoming issues in the 1960s. Most of the time, it was only that, ad copy, simple hyperbole, and ballyhoo to pump up interest. 2 or 3 fan letters were enough of a consensus for a demand back in the Silver Age. But seriously, there was a demand for more spoiler. Stephanie Brown started life as a one-and-done plot device. Began with my contempt for a character called the Cluemaster, which is funny because a lot of people loved the Cluemaster apparently. And so Chuck says, as I was a young comic geek, when I first came across him, my loathing for the Cluemaster ran deep. He's a villain created by Gardner Fox and Carmine Infantino back during the Batmania caused by Batman the TV show. I'll never understand why these otherwise talented comics titans would come up with what is, essentially, a cheap Riddler knockoff. This guy didn't have anything like the Riddler's complex game plan of using Riddlers to either lead the dynamic duo to his crimes or, if solved incorrectly, lead them away on a wild goose chase. This clown just left rebuses and picture puzzles behind. I thought it might be interesting to set Cluemaster up in the comics as every bit the loser I had long before decided he was. I wanted him to turn him into a comics foil, a fool, and began to think up ways to make him miserable. That meant exploring more of his private life. Who was the Cluemaster when he was at home? Because he was such a second-tier backbencher who was caught so often and lived a humble life as he'd never make that big score, I thought it would be interesting if he had a wife who worked a job to support him. And how about a kid, a daughter? I made the daughter a teenager, a rebellious teenager. And what form would that acting out of supervillain's daughter take? She'd suit up in a costume to put the chocks to her loser daddy's criminal career, of course. So Stephanie Brown was born. Well, after assigned her father an alias. He'd never been given a birth name. I chose Arthur Brown after the crazy world of Arthur Brown, a British invasion group with only chartered once, with a single called Fire. The story was fun to write, and artist Tom Lyle enjoyed imagining the kind of costume a cash-strapped adolescent could come up with on her own. As you can see, both Dixon and Lyle gave some thought to the creation. It wasn't just writing as you know. There was thought put into the creation of Stephanie Brown. We did this story as one of the early arcs in our shared run on Detective Comics. We were pleased with the results and moved on to our next story with no intention of thinking the spoiler ever again. Then the letters started coming in, as I just read. This was back before you could make your every opinion known to the world by using your mother box. Believe it or not, kids, you had to write or type a letter, put it in an envelope, get a stamp, and drop it in the mailbox. Oh, that was a box that would be on the corner of your street for the purpose of collecting outgoing mail. Then you'd wait months to see if your letter appeared on the letters page of the comic book you sent it to. Letters demanding the return of Spoiler came in right after her first appearance and continued for months after. As you saw, it was two different um, episodes, two different issues, 654 and 655, that printed letters asking for more Spoiler. And the fans were not actually demanding Steph come back, they were expecting it. It wasn't if she'd be showing up, it was when. They thought we had some long-term plans for the Spoiler and were anxious to see what they were. I always find it best not only to meet the expectations of fans and readers, but to exceed them. So I began working out how to make this Spoiler a recurring supporting character in the Batman universe. Lucky for her and me, I was getting ready to work on the oft-delayed debut of the Robin monthly series. I'd already laid the groundwork for Tim Drake's supporting cast. He had school friends and a steady girlfriend, and his home life with his widower dad was established. What I needed were more characters to populate the stories, teachers, neighbors, and the like. And as Tim was an adolescent with all the tropes and troubles of a character that age, I needed a romantic triangle. Every comic book teenage boy has more than one attractive girl vying for his attention. Archie Andrews is the classic, of course. Even pitiable Pitty Parker was seen as a man candy by more than one total babe. Who better than Stephanie Brown to play Betty to Tim's then steady girl, Ariana Jurkenko's Veronica? But who was Steph? What was her deal? She was angry at her dad, but that's not enough to build a character from. It was the gimmick I used to bring her back into the comics when the Cluemaster returned to plague Robin in early day issues of the monthly. But there had to be a lot more to draw them together than their mutual desire to see her dad behind bars. At first, I played off the idea that Tim would have a lot more in common with Stephanie than he could ever have with the Ariana. They were both crime-fighting costume daredevils. They both had secret identities. I mean, come on, that's hot. Tim knew the Spoiler's true alias while keeping his own a secret, which created tension between the two. Further tension was cranked up by Robin hiding his frequent jaunts with the crime-fighting gal pal from Batman. Whoa, character development was happening all over the place. Even with Daddy safely locked away in a cell, Steph kept going on patrol on her crappy second-hand dirt bike. It was unspoken that this was because she was drawn to the boy Wonder. And as much as he tried to talk her out of the dangerous life of a vigilante, it was clear that he was into her. But Tim was such a good guy that he either fought down his attraction or denied it. He had a girlfriend, after all, back in his real life as Tim Drake, straight arrow, straight A student, and loyal son. Do you see what was happening here? I'd stumbled into that dream scenario that any writer fervently hopes for. These characters were writing themselves. In very short order, Stephanie came to life in my mind. I knew her. I knew everything about her, and to me, she lived a life beyond the pages of the comics. She had desires, motivations, and fears. I can't think of another character in the thousands of comic stories I've written that took on as rich an imagined existence as Steph. She's like the daughter I never had. Because of her upbringing, she lived a life without clear direction and made one regrettable mistake after another. Sometimes you have to be cruel to your characters. How else can you torture your fans? Poor Steph, children by Robin, wound up with some loser on the rebound who got her pregnant. Instead of creating a gulf between them, the way Steph dealt with having a baby brought her and Robin closer together. This led to Tim unmasking to share his identity with her, and eventually her introduction to the Batcave as an authorized member of Comicdom's most exclusive club. Sure, she's a minor character in the universe of Batman. She even died once. But Stephanie Brown is here to stay, apparently. She'll always be back to spoil the day of bad guys who threaten the fragile peace of Gotham City. Why? Because you demand it. Chuck Dixon, May 2020. So that is just a fun little piece of reminiscent, and that was the 28th year of her existence. And then here's some original art pages by Tom Lyle. This is actually 648. So both of these pages are from 648. Really cool pencils, and I think he signed it to the person with a little bat. That was great. And then we also have this Tim and Steph embracing on the rooftops. And this was a New York Comic Con 2015 commission. I love this. You can see his classic Tim hair. I love the composition of the moon, and the inking he did here is really nice. Just the black cape and the black of the night. It gives it a nice romantic, sort of wistful vibe. Then, of course, Steph was erased in 2011 with the New 52 and then brought back by Scott Snyder and James Tynion IV in Batman Eternal. MTV wrote a series of interviews for every issue of the 52 issues of Batman Eternal. And the issue 3, where Stephanie returned, they interviewed Scott Snyder. Interviewer said, let's talk about Stephanie Brown's entry. Why was it important to bring her back this way? Scott Snyder. The key was bringing her back in a way that would honor her, in a way, what she was before the New 52 relaunch, while still keeping her something that has a new purpose, a new status, and a new definition. It really began with her own title as Spoiler. Back in the day, she was referred to as the Spoiler because she spoils all the plans of her father and bad guys, and so on. Here, the new definition, the popular definition, has so much to do with revealing secrets before you're supposed to. We thought it would be great if we could reinvent her with a similar origin, but make her one of the key figures in all of Eternal, because she knows things before anyone else does. So as the series continues, she becomes one of the most wanted women in Gotham. Not just because of the stuff she learns with Cluemaster here, but the stuff she learns as the series goes on. She becomes an incredibly powerful figure and a really important character to the entire story overall. That justified bringing her back, and I'm really glad DC let us. I can't tell you how grateful we are to fans for being so vocal about their love for her before we brought her back, and now that she's coming back, it really means a lot to all of us who care about her too. MTV. Her lack of appearances in comics for so long has been a hugely polarizing issue at conventions in particular. So how did she finally end up in the mix here for Batman Eternal? Snyder. We talked about bringing her back on Batman about a year ago, and when we started planning Eternal, I realized, talking to James Tynion IV, that it would be a better place to do it there because of the story we were trying to set up, how much more of a role she'd play there instead of a supportive role in Batman. It felt more like she'd be brought back and then relegated to smaller status because of how crowded Batman is in terms of the events that are happening. Side note, this is actually probably true. If you look at the two characters who were created in Scott Snyder's Batman run, and that would be Duke Thomas and Harper Row, both of them have really struggled because they were supporting and they didn't really have a major role. They've gone from title to title, and different writers have championed them, but they've never been able to really break out into true ongoing status. Once the opportunity to bring her back, there came along, and we knew what the meaning of her name would be and how she would work in such a big role in the series. We started lobbying Dan DiDio and DC when we were pitching the series to let us bring her back early and bring her back loud. Honestly, they were pretty receptive from go. A lot of us were bracing for a fight in some ways. We knew how badly people have wanted the character back for a while, and it hadn't happened. I think we expected some resistance internally too. But what we saw was that they were waiting for a story that would fit with who she was now in the New 52. An echo of who she used to be and something new. It wasn't some kind of behind-the-scenes salacious tell-all war. I should flip it and say we'll release the secrets one day, the black files about how we got Stephanie Brown back, and it's such a tale. But they were honestly receptive to it once we told them what we had planned. So James Tynion has said that there actually was a bit of behind-the-scenes planning, but I think they planned it well enough that they didn't have resistance. So it was a little more intentional than Scott Snyder seems to make it say, but it wasn't a big war. MTV. Another big scene with Stephanie. She discovers that her father is a supervillain, and not only that, he's part of a bad guy team. What can you tell us about the guys going forward? They play a really big role. One of the major elements of the story has to do with the criminals that you think of as B-listers, getting to give them bigger roles. They have greater resonance as the story progresses, causing other things to happen as it goes forward, like a domino effect. These people at the table aren't throwaways. They'll come back in a big way, especially in their relationship to Stephanie and her plot. They're all major figures in the story. Now, depending on how you like Batman Eternal, you may or may not agree with Scott Snyder there. I definitely see what James Tynion and Scott Snyder meant to do with these villains and the plot, but it was a little messy, and the ending is messy. I love Batman Eternal. I love it a lot. I collected every single issue. I have like 10 to 15 of them signed. I have every spin-off of Batman Eternal that was made. I really like it. It's still very messy. It's a weekly comic, and James Tynion's plotting, I mean, he was brand new at this time. He'd been writing for about 2 years. His plotting always was a bit messy. It got much better as he went on. His Detective Comics plotting was much, much better than his plotting in Batman Eternal and Batman and Robin Eternal. And then his plotting has continued to get better with Joker. And I haven't read all of his much of his new creator-owned stuff, but they're very popular. So I think he has continued to improve. But Batman Eternal, being one of his big first major projects, it's messy, but I still love it. It feels like spending a year every week with your favorite Bat characters in Gotham, and that's awesome. So that's my celebration of Stephanie Brown, 31 years. The big 3-0 was last year. I don't know if I did anything. I tweeted a bit about it, but I don't think I did anything on YouTube. But I will try and do another thing next year. Thanks for watching. Happy Stephanie Brown.